Well, it's a Mad Master here doing another video, and this one is on the subject of time travel. So let's talk about Back to the Future and all the, one of my favorite movies, by the way. The trilogy, actually, all three of them pretty much are some of my favorites. So not really related to that, but I was just thinking the other day. And I was thinking about this for a while. What if my consciousness or my essence travel back in time to a different decade or era? And I just started listening to Iggy and the Stooges, and I never really listened to them before in my life, but I've always liked bands that kind of were influenced by them. So I started thinking about this. I've thought about this before. So I first of all, let's say like I was a little bit of a younger person, during a certain time, and that time would be 1969. And let's just say that happened. What would my record collection look like? And that's what this video is about. So I would say that it's very difficult to think about going back 10 years before that day or that year, 1969 or 1970, because it would be a lot harder to find stuff that I could listen to. Unlike, in that year you had a lot of stuff already developed. But I was thinking about a list, and this is kind of what my list would be if I had to live in that time. So first off, there's no death metal, there's no technical death metal, there's no black metal, there's no techno or industrial or any kind of thing like that. So barring that, though, there's a lot of good rock that's even out by that time. And I was thinking, so one of the first things one of my favorite bands is the Doors. And I would have let's say just I had disposable income, I'd probably, their generation gap was more in effect back then. So let's just say I was a little bit younger than I am, or, give 5 to 10 years younger or more than I am now. Back then, just because that generation gap was pretty. I mean, if you were over 30, holy shit, you were. They said don't trust anyone over 30. So the Doors. So I'd have every Doors album by that point. I think the Soft Parade was their latest one. I have to double check on that. So I'd have every Doors record. Let's just say I had just the disposable income I do now, with regards to records. And I would have every Jimi Hendrix album that would have been released by then. Of course, that would be, I believe, the first two, and I'm not sure about the third one. If the third Jimi Hendrix Experience album would have been released, so that would be definitely in my collection. I'd have every Who album that had been released, and some of the singles and stuff too. And let's see. So I don't know if I'd have a lot of Cream album. The Cream albums, I'm not as big as into them, but I would at least have maybe the Blues Breakers, Eric Clapton, John Mayall or whatever album. The Beano album I really like. I actually really like that one. So I would have some Stones albums too. I'd like the Stones. A few Beatles albums, but I wouldn't. I would probably have all of them. But I wouldn't listen to that as much, I would say. So I'd have a lot of bebop, and some free jazz, and I'd have Free Jazz, the album by Ornette Coleman. I believe it was released by then. John Coltrane, Miles Davis, stuff like that. And I would even explore into Sun Ra and stuff, because there wasn't a lot of space rock, but that comes to the next band, Pink Floyd. Depending, let's say my consciousness would put in someone that was younger in the years 1969. My consciousness, my memories, and I'd have to deal with, this is the whole point of this, is I'd have to deal with being in 1969 and having limited options of listening to music. So I would definitely have all the Pink Floyd. I know that Pirates of the Gates of Dawn apparently wasn't available as well in America as some of the later stuff, but I'd have, every Syd Barrett single, and, Uma Guma was released in 1969, I believe, and I'd probably have that, or at least it would be on its way, depending on when it was released. So that would be a good start. I'd have classical stuff, Now, if I was 10 years before, if I travel back in time, I'd have a lot more rockabilly and stuff. I'd have some of that stuff too, and I wouldn't, and R&B kind of early, old R&B stuff. A lot of classical, some opera stuff. I would try to venture into maybe some of the experimental electronic stuff. I don't know if that Wendy Carlos album was released by then. I'm gonna check that. Wendy Carlos, because Switched on Bach I don't think was released for a couple more years. Let me take a look here. Oh no, it was actually 1968. So I'd have some of the early electronic albums, stuff like that. Zappa, Frank Zappa's albums that he had released by then. Uh, I guess I would have. Well, I love the Elvis. I think it was 1968, the comeback special. I would have that on vinyl. Like that would be one of my records. And obviously the Stooges, as I mentioned before, Velvet Underground. Just bands like just a lot of those bands. There would be a lot of bands to listen to. Now, as far as playing music, it would be a lot harder because I have all this knowledge about what's going to come in the future and all this shit. It'd be like I couldn't form Iron Maiden back in 1969. I don't know. It would be tougher to do harder rock and the distortion. The distortion back then, it was harder to get that kind of distortion. I mean, you had to. There were bands that were sort of approaching that, and Deep Purple didn't release their really classic stuff until the next year. So I liked some of their early post or pre In Rock albums, but they really didn't take off until In Rock and maybe that Concerto and Orchestra. I'd probably have a copy of that because I would know, and some of their other stuff. I would know that would be a band to watch out for. And of course, I'd have Led Zeppelin, even though, whatever, about Led Zeppelin. I'm kind of mixed on them in some ways, but I do like them. I'd have Jeff Beck group, was it Truth? Yeah, their first album. Obviously, that's kind of comparable to the first Led Zeppelin album. And, I would listen to those albums. I'd like the hard rock and the MC5, kind of Detroit pre-punk stuff. And I'd be buying the early Alice Cooper albums, which are really fucking weird, by the way. The really early stuff, pre-Love It to Death. Really weird shit. Kind of underrated, actually, in my opinion. So I'd have some of that stuff. And, this would cost me, today's dollars. If I bought all that on vinyl, it'd be like fucking 100, probably maybe $1,000. Well, not $1,000, but, having all these records, it'd be, at least 500 maybe. 300 to 500 for the majority of them, and then it'd just be. But of course, back then, I don't know how much records were $1 or some shit. I don't know. I know comic books used to be like 12 cents. So, but I can't remember how much how much records used to be. But I'd be buying that. So what would I do as far as music though? That's a good question too. So I guess. If my consciousness, was in this person and I knew what was to come, obviously I can make a lot of good bets. I could say, well, this album happened, this thing, so we can be ahead of our time in this way. Obviously some time paradox shit could happen if I put too many like sweep arpeggios in the in the music or some shit. I mean, or playing some like kind of pre-power metal in 1969 just wouldn't work out. So I try to stick with the fuzz pedals and the Octavia and the wah pedal and shit. I would try not to, and the Echoplex. Now that was a fucking cool effect. Pink Floyd used that a lot. Some of the space rock stuff. I'd have to really adjust and adapt. To the time. So that's about all for this video. I just thought it would be an interesting perspective as far as. What you would do if you had to like live in a different time. What music would you listen to? Because music's like one of the most, if not the most important thing in my life. So regardless of what people have said in the past or whatever, about anyways, I had this ex-girlfriend once that I had this one of my 412. I have a 412 amp cabinet, and she's like, "Oh, your toy's in the way." It's like, fucking toy, I want to do this with my life. Fuck you, But anyways, that's about it for now. On the next video, I think I'm going to try to do 1959, that would be a lot more difficult. I'm not going to go back in time any more than that, but I think that's, those are the. I don't think I could, unless I was listening to like all like Robert Johnson's records, and I'd have to go in like a different neighborhood to get that because of the segregation and shit. But anyways, that'll be my next video. Would be 1959, and 1969 is this video. So.